breaking dependence on energy supply from Russia, promoting green technology, and combating climate change. There are too many reasons for Western countries to plan to eliminate crude oil and fossil fuels. The G7 summit has just concluded with many important commitments on this issue. However, the implementation process by the U.S. and its allies may not be easy, as a plan to eliminate fossil fuels is inadvertently reinforcing the relationship between Russia and China. More dangerously, tax incentives for U.S. electric vehicle projects are at risk of flowing into Beijing's pockets. How should the United States and Western countries react to the current situation? Join us in FBNC's The World Affairs to find out. The relationship between China and Russia poses the great danger faced by America and the West since the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1939 initiated World War II. If alarm bells are not ringing all across Washington, D.C., they should be. According to The Hill, the China-Russia symbiosis is easy to understand. Russia provides the oil, gas, and raw materials at discount prices, while China trades the high technology and endless amounts of manufactured products. It's a win-win. Russia is fueling China's technology-based economy and their military, not to mention Russian agriculture production, which helps feed China's 1.5 billion people. The relationship fulfills the long-term basic needs of their respective partners. For the foreseeable future, China's vast purchases of Russian natural resources perpetuate the war in Ukraine, making China wholly complicit in the ongoing death and destruction. Because of the China lifeline, Russian President Vladimir Putin can conceivably keep fighting until Western electorates lose patience and quit. Market Insider reports that, besides China and India, Turkey and Bulgaria are the largest crude oil customers of Russia. Conversely, America's economy is struggling with high inflation, bank failures, and experiencing a pressing need to mobilize its defense industries to keep up its critical role in the war in Ukraine, producing ammunition in particular. And given present climate change policies, there's been no mobilization of a vast American fossil fuels capacity to push back on the current Russia and Saudi energy dominance. Outside of America and Canada, Western Europe, and Australia, the rest of the world, including Eastern Europe, see Western democracies denuding themselves of a very fossil fuels that still developing countries need to grow their economies and feed their people. These nations are committed to using fossil fuels and may only be giving lip service to climate change because they want friendly and financial relations with the West. The Hill reported on the April 16 that the G7 countries have agreed to rapidly transition to clean and renewable energy, but have not committed to phasing out coal before the deadline 2030. Accordingly, the countries have unanimously agreed not to use coal by 2050, but have not committed to phasing out coal by the end of the decade. At the same time, they leave open possibility of using fossil fuels, but set a target of developing electric vehicles to reduce carbon emissions by 2035. In the Southern Hemisphere, developing countries such as India and Brazil have remained on the sidelines of the conflict in Ukraine, partly because they perceive the West as limiting fossil fuels and focusing on addressing risks associated with climate change. Historically, both India and Brazil have needed oil, natural gas, coal, and petrochemicals, products derived from fossil fuels, to survive and develop. The West phasing out of fossil fuels turned out to be a boon for countries rich in these resources, such as Russia, China, and Middle Eastern nations. With this landscape, the United States is no longer taking the lead in the Southern Hemisphere, as the roles of China, Russia, and the Middle East begin to replace the benefits previously obtained from Europe and the US.
Sau khi quốc gia này đạt thỏa thuận giao dịch bằng đồng nhân dân tệ với Trung Quốc, một nỗ lực nhằm giảm bớt sự phụ thuộc vào đồng đô la. Cơ quan xúc tiến thương mại và đầu tư Brazil cho biết, hiệp định giữa Brazil và Trung Quốc sẽ góp phần làm giảm chi phí và thúc đẩy hoạt động đầu tư song phương. Trong khi đó, báo cáo của Ngân hàng Trung ương Brazil cho thấy, tính đến cuối năm 2022, tỷ trọng đồng nhân dân tệ trong dự trữ ngoại hối quốc tế của Brazil đã đạt 5,37%, cao hơn tỷ trọng của đồng euro. Điều đó có nghĩa nhân dân tệ đã trở thành ngoại hối dự trữ lớn thứ hai của quốc gia Nam Mỹ.
Meanwhile, according to Reuters, Russia Gazprom Bank has expanded its ties with banks in India to facilitate trade between Moscow and New Delhi, with transactions being settled in two countries' foreign currencies. It is worth noting that trade between India and Russia has surged since the West imposed a sanction against Russia. At this point, Russia has become India's largest crude oil supplier. According to Reuters, Gazprom Bank is Russia's third largest bank by total assets and a primary settlement hub in the energy sector. As India purchases more oil, the trade balance is increasingly tilting in Russia's favor.
Bà Borysenko cũng hy vọng hoạt động giao thương giữa hai quốc gia sẽ phát triển, giúp cho hoạt động thanh toán bằng đồng rupee và đồng rúp chiếm tỷ trọng ngày càng cao. Reuters cho hay vào năm ngoái, Ấn Độ đã đề xuất các quy định tạo thuận lợi cho các quốc gia đối tác thanh toán bằng đồng rupee. Cả chính quyền và người dân ở các quốc gia khu vực Nam bán cầu mang tư tưởng truyền thống, chưa sẵn sàng cho các chính sách xã hội mang tính đột phá của phương Tây. Trong khi đó, Nga lại có chủ trương bảo vệ các giá trị truyền thống, còn Trung Quốc cũng không hề hào hứng với việc thay đổi để chống biến đổi khí hậu.
Beyond the Southern Hemisphere, the U.S. also needs to consider other issues. At this point, Iran is virtually an ally of Russia and China. Meanwhile, the Gulf countries are heavily purchasing discounted products from Moscow. According to the Wall Street Journal, the UAE and Saudi Arabia are purchasing Russian oil for consumption and refining, subsequently exporting the products at market prices. Additionally, the UAE is emerging as a significant storage hub for Russian oil and fuel. As a result, trading companies import Russian oil into UAE and re-export it to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or East Africa. U.S. officials have consistently imposed the growing relationship between Russia and the Gulf nations. However, the price of the Russia-Ural crude oil is 30% lower than the Brent crude oil, promising highly attractive profits. At this point, Moscow has demonstrated the ability to overcome Western sanctions, with crude oil exports remaining higher than before conflict with Ukraine. Moreover, Saudi Arabia is surprisingly friendly towards Russia and China. Saudi Arabia clearly sees the U.S. trying to cut off its national lifeline while simultaneously seeking to limit the role of Riyadh government in the Middle East. In mid-March, the Export-Import Bank of China was reported to have reached a cooperation agreement and granted its first loan to National Bank of Saudi Arabia. The purpose of it is to ensure the settlement of transactions between two countries' companies. According to Sputnik News, Saudi Arabia began considering trading in Chinese yuan starting from March 2022. The Riyadh government's active collaboration with Beijing has, by now, resulted in significant progress. At the end of last month, China also signed its first energy deal set in yuan, as per a contract to purchase approximately 65,000 tons of liquefied natural gas (LNG) from the UAE. Up to now, fossil fuels has been a dispensable component of all economies worldwide. The Biden administration has a plan to reduce the use of fossil fuels from 79% of the total energy demand to 65% by 2050. The question is, what are the economics and political risks for the United States in reducing this 14%? On the April 17, Reuters quoted Russian Deputy Energy Minister Pavel Sorokin as saying that the country's oil production is projected to remain stable until 2025. So far, Russia has managed to redirect oil exports from Europe to India, China, and Turkey, countries that have seized the opportunity to import cheap oil, regardless of $60 price cap that the G7 imposed on Russia crude oil. Referring to Russia's long-term plan, Sorokin said Russia is planning to build more oil storage facilities. Reserves will help make supply more flexible, better suited to the current situation, where prices and demand frequently fluctuate unpredictably. Sorokin observed, last year a Russian official said Moscow was building storage facility for about 100 million tons of oil, equivalent to 700 million barrels, according to the projects that could last 4 years. When Russia can ensure a crude oil supply, the axis of relations revolving around Russia and China becomes a dangerous threat. Additionally, developing countries in the Southern Hemisphere still rely on fossil fuels. According to The Guardian, an announcement on April 17 stated that the Russian and Indian trade ministers said the two countries are negotiating to reach a free trade agreement, a move that could escalate tensions with Washington and the EU, as Western countries try to isolate Moscow because of the conflict in Ukraine. On the Indian side, Foreign Minister Saikanda said the COVID pandemic has disrupted discussions between New Delhi and Moscow-led Eurasian Economic Union about a trade agreement. The Russia-India bilateral relationship is one of the most stable in the world, and high-level negotiations are underway. The Guardian reports that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also holding trade talks with the UK and the EU. However, a deal with Russia could create tensions with the West before India hosts the G20 summit in New Delhi this fall. On the Russian side, the Kremlin is working to build close ties with countries outside the West, including welcoming Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Moscow last month. This week, China and Russia also announced they will strengthen military cooperation following a meeting between President Putin and China Defense Minister Li Shangfu in Moscow.
Về phía Nga, Điện Kremlin đang nỗ lực xây dựng mối quan hệ gần gũi với các quốc gia ngoài phương Tây, bao gồm việc chào đón chuyến công du của Chủ tịch Trung Quốc Tập Cận Bình đến Moscow vào tháng trước. Trong tuần này, Trung Quốc và Nga cũng tuyên bố sẽ tăng cường hợp tác quân sự sau cuộc gặp giữa Tổng thống Putin và Bộ trưởng Quốc phòng Trung Quốc Lý Thượng Phúc tại Moscow.
More dangerously, many grants have been included in the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act with the goal of promoting American electric vehicle and battery production. However, Chinese companies could also benefit through the potential loopholes. According to an analysis cited by Quartz on the April 18th, U.S. policy supporting electric vehicles and battery production could end up benefiting Chinese companies, the competitor the United States wants to reduce dependence on. Specifically, China Goten High-Tech is pursuing this path with plans to open a $2.4 billion battery component factory in Michigan. Lawmakers in the House have green-lighted the project, but the Senate has delayed approval, partly due to Russian ties to China. The company is now caught up in a political storm, and critics argue that funding Chinese investment in the U.S. would weaken American economic security. Meanwhile, Ford and China giant battery manufacturer CATL are partnering to build a battery factory for electric vehicles, also in Michigan. Although Ford claims no U.S. tax money is being transferred to CATL, opponents argue that the deal only increases U.S. dependence on China. In addition, there is another way for China to receive tax benefits from IRA, that is to collaborate with a company from a country allied with the United States. This month, China's Sinchuan Yahoo Industrial Group signed an agreement with South Korea's LG Energy Solution to produce the lithium hydroxide in Morocco. As such, Seoul and Washington are allies, while Morocco has a free trade agreement with the United States, meeting two conditions required by the IRA to receive tax benefits. Of course, this approach comes with risks. Washington may decide to exclude joint ventures with Chinese partners from assessing tax benefits, even when an ally country is involved. According to Business Korea, if the United States tighten the details of the IRA further to control China, there is a possibility that LG Energy Solution will not be eligible for tax benefits from the U.S. government. Furthermore, China can also benefit from Washington tax incentives if they invest in the supply chains of important mineral producers. Take Indonesia as an example, a major nickel exporter with a significant position in the global battery supply chain. Indonesia plans to propose a limited free trade agreement with the U.S., allowing their company to benefit from U.S. tax incentives as well. However, a free trade agreement on minerals between Jakarta and Washington could also benefit Chinese companies, as these firms have heavily invested in Indonesia's nickel refining industry. For instance, Indonesia's Harita Nikkei, which recently listed in the Jakarta Stock Exchange, is collaborating with China Legend Mining in a nickel and cobalt refining project. Another Indonesian nickel company, Medica Battery Materials, preparing to list on the stock market this week, also has connections with China's CATL.
Mỹ đang nỗ lực thoát khỏi sự phụ thuộc vào Bắc Kinh. Tuy nhiên, những nỗ lực của Hoa Kỳ đang tạo cơ hội cho Trung Quốc. Đây là một nút thắt cần có thời gian để tháo gỡ, dựa trên cơ sở cân nhắc và hoạch định chính sách một cách cẩn thận.
The plan to phase out crude oil and fossil fuels by the U.S. and Western countries aim to combat climate change and lay the foundation for sustainable development. However, this process is becoming an imminent threat. Perhaps it's a time for the West to reassess the implementation of this plan before it's too late. With that, we have reached the end of our program today. Thanks for attention and see you next time.